There's a moment near the end of Game of Thrones where Tyrion Lannister picks up a crossbow and kills his own father. Everyone remembers that scene. What almost nobody talks about is the line Tywin says right before he dies. A line that, once you actually sit with it, retroactively explains almost everything Tyrion does for the entire rest of the show. He doesn't say, "I'm sorry." He doesn't say, "Please." He looks at his son, seconds from death, and tells him the truth he's clearly believed the whole time, that he wishes Tyrion had never been born. And here's what's strange. Tyrion doesn't look shocked. He doesn't look like a man hearing something new. He looks like someone finally hearing, out loud, the thing he's suspected his entire life. Which raises a question worth sitting with for the next few minutes. What does it actually do to a person to grow up already knowing that? Not suspecting it. Knowing it, the way you know your own name, from before you can even remember learning it. Because once you start pulling that thread, Tyrion's entire character, the wit, the charm, the drinking, the way he can talk his way out of anything, starts looking less like a personality and more like an alarm system. Something built, piece by piece, by people who made it very clear that being lovable was never going to be an option for him. Being useful was the best he was ever going to get. Hey, let's find out exactly how a father and a sister spent 20-some years building the man who eventually pointed a crossbow at one of them. Now let's start with the first thing that ever happens to Tyrion, before he can walk or talk or do anything at all. His mother, Joanna Lannister, dies giving birth to him. And here's the part that matters. By most accounts, Joanna is the one person Tywin Lannister ever actually loved. Not respected, not valued politically, loved. So think about what that means for a newborn. Tyrion doesn't just lose a mother he'll never remember. He's born directly into the role of the reason his father's one real love is gone. He's a dwarf too, in a world obsessed with strength and legacy and appearance, which means the physical proof of something went wrong is written on him permanently, where everyone can see it and draw their own conclusions. And nobody in that family lets him forget it. Cersei doesn't just resent him quietly. She tells him to his face, more than once, as a child, that he killed their mother, that he's the monster, that he should have died, and she should have lived. Not implied, said out loud, over and over, until you start to notice something in how Tyrion responds to it later. He jokes about his own birth before anyone else gets the chance to use it against him. That's not confidence. That's a defense that got built early enough that it feels like part of his personality now. But here's a question worth asking. Is there ever a moment where Tyrion does something undeniable? Something so obviously good, so clearly heroic, that even his family has to admit it? There is. It's the Battle of the Blackwater. The city is about to fall. An enemy fleet is bearing down on King's Landing, and Tyrion, not some war hero, not Tywin, not a knight, comes up with the plan that saves the entire capital. Wildfire. A chain across the bay, ruthless improvisation under pressure. It works. He personally leads men into the fighting and nearly dies doing it. By any reasonable measure, Tyrion single-handedly saves his family's entire regime. So here's what you'd expect to happen next. Recognition. Maybe even for once, something that looks like pride from his father. Instead, Tywin comes home, takes over, and quietly makes sure the credit goes somewhere else. To Sir Loras's family, to other lords, anywhere but his own son. The one time Tyrion delivers an unambiguous, enormous victory. His father erases him from the story of his own win. And that's the moment the pattern becomes impossible to miss. Being brilliant doesn't earn Tyrion love. It just earns him more use. And even that gets taken away the second it's convenient. So what does he do instead? He doubles down. More wit, more charm. Make himself so entertaining, so impossible to ignore, that maybe someone eventually decides he's worth keeping around for reasons that have nothing to do with what he can do for them. And when Tyrion is put on trial for a murder he didn't commit, you'd think a man that clever would fight to prove his innocence. Instead, he does something that looks, on the surface, like giving up. He demands trial by combat. Why would the smartest person in the room choose violence over argument? Because he's already run the numbers. His own father is the judge. His sister is running the prosecution behind the scenes. Witnesses he trusted get up and lie, or twist the truth just enough to bury him. Tyrion isn't panicking. He's concluding, correctly, that this particular family was never going to give him real justice, only the appearance of a trial, with a verdict that was decided before it started. Trial by combat isn't recklessness. It's a man who has spent his whole life being underestimated by these people finally refusing to play a game he knows is rigged. Here's the question that matters going into the trial. Is there anyone in Tyrion's life who wants him for him, and not for what he can do? For a while, it seems like the answer is Shae. Whatever you think of the relationship, Tyrion genuinely believes, for a stretch of time, that he's found the one person who isn't managing him, isn't using him, isn't waiting for the moment he stops being useful. Then she takes the stand at his trial, and instead of the truth, she gives the court a twisted, ugly version of their relationship, one that hands his enemies exactly the monster they've always wanted him to be. It isn't just a betrayal. It's the worst possible confirmation of the one fear Tyrion has been carrying since before he could talk, that nobody actually loves him, that everyone who gets close is either using him or waiting for the moment it pays to turn on him. When he finally killed Tywin, this is where the whole arc lands, and it's Shae, more than anything else, that lights the fuse. After escaping his cell, Tyrion goes to find Tywin one last time, and instead finds Shae in his father's bed. That's the moment everything breaks. The two people who've done the most to convince him he's unlovable, revealed to have been together, literally, in the bed of the father, who moments later will tell him he wishes he'd never been born. It's almost too on the nose to be an accident. This is the story handing Tyrion the final, undeniable proof of everything his whole life has been quietly telling him. And it's the thing he can't come back from. Tyrion doesn't kill his father out of nowhere, in a moment of pure rage that comes from nothing. He kills him after a lifetime of exactly this, of being told he's worthless, of being denied credit for his own victories, of watching the two people closest to him betray him together, and then hearing, one final time, his own father tell him he wishes he'd never been born, even as he's dying. There's a way of reading that scene that says Tyrion finally becomes what his family always accused him of being, a killer, a monster. But there's another way of reading it that I think is more honest to everything the show built leading up to it. Tyrion doesn't kill Tywin because he's evil. He kills him because he has spent his entire life absorbing the belief that he is fundamentally unworthy of love, and the one person most responsible for teaching him that belief is lying to him one final time, unrepentant, with the person Tyrion loved still warm in his bed. It's less an act of villainy than the final collapse of a lifetime of swallowed rage, finally finding a place to go. Now, I don't think this excuses everything about Tyrion, and I don't think the show wants us to either. He can be cruel in his own right, dismissive of people who love him, self-destructive with alcohol for most of the story, and genuinely careless with the people who try to get close to him, Shae included, well before she ever betrays him. His family broke him. But the show is careful not to let that be a blank check for everything he does afterward. And there's a version of this story where you could argue Tyrion's wit and intelligence aren't purely a defense mechanism, that they're simply who he is, and it's reductive to frame his entire personality as a trauma response to Tywin and Cersei. He clearly takes real pleasure in books, in ideas, in conversation, independent of whether it earns him anyone's approval. Not every good quality has to be read as a wound, but even holding both of those things at once, it's hard to watch Tyrion's arc and not see the shape of a specific kind of damage running underneath it. A child who was told, by the people whose job it was to love him unconditionally, that his existence was a tragedy, and who spent the rest of his life proving, over and over, brilliantly, exhaustingly, that he was worth keeping around anyway, to people who mostly never once told him that he already was. By the end, when he's finally handed real power and responsibility as Hand of the King under Bran, it's almost bittersweet rather than triumphant, because you understand exactly what it took to get him there. Not a family that nurtured his gifts. A family that made those gifts the only thing about him that was ever allowed to matter. What do you think? Was Tyrion always going to end up this way? Or did Tywin and Cersei make him into something he never had to become? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.